Good morning, Philadelphia Graveyard and History. Today we are going to be visiting this famous church in front of you, the Church of the Holy Trinity, Rittenhouse Square. The church is an Episcopal-style church located here at the corner of 19th and Walnut Street, Rittenhouse Square. Designed by architect John Nottingham, and the first service was held on March 27th, 1859. The corner tower was added in 1867. Holy Trinity was added to the National Register of Historic Places on February 6, 1973. The church is known for its numerous stained glass windows, including 5 by Louis Comfort Tiffany and 1 by Luke Oliver Merson. Today, the Church of the Holy Trinity's mission is, in the name of Christ, to deepen our faith, to enlarge our community, and to act on our beliefs. Today we will be joined by the Co-Rector, Reverend Rachel Gardner, who is Co-Rector along with her husband, John Gardner. Now let's go inside and see what we can learn about the church and the Christmas carol, O Little Town of Bethlehem. Reverend Rachel Gardner, who is the Co-Rector of the Church of the Holy Trinity with her husband, John. Good morning, Reverend.
Good morning.
Thank you for allowing me to film this.
Yeah, of course.
Beautiful church.
Thank you.
Please tell us a little bit about the history of your church.
Sure. So, Rittenhouse Square was the last square that was developed in Penn's original plan of having City Hall with 4 equidistant squares. So when Rittenhouse area, the square, was being built up, a group of people decided that there needed to be a church right on the square. There's a church 2 blocks away, St. Mark's, but they wanted it established directly on the square to have a public space on the square. So in 1857, they established the Episcopal church called the Church of the Holy Trinity, and they began building, and they finished this building in 1859, and the first service was in April of 1859. And so this church originally was built, it looks different now than it did when it was built, though basically it's the same. It was built in a more Quaker style, but it was built in the Romanesque style. So if you can see sort of arches, vaulted ceilings. That was the style at the time, but it was the style of a low church or a sort of preacher church rather than the Anglo-Catholic style that was St. Mark's across the way. And so this church came up around the same time as Rittenhouse, and it's sort of been here for 160 some years now, almost 170 years, and it's sort of been expanded a couple times. So there's a bell tower that has the oldest carillon that is still played in the United States. That was added on after the Civil War. This dome that you see here was actually added and expanded in the 1890s when the parish house or the rector's house was built. And that is a very large 15,000 square foot home that was used for entertaining as well as for the priest's home. And that is now offices and program space. But it was originally the house, and so it just kept changing. And then the stained glass were added in the Victorian period, and so it sort of became less and less Quaker style and more in the Victorian style as it sort of evolved and grew over the years.
How does the Christmas carol, O Little Town of Bethlehem, shape the history of your church?
Sure. So, A Little Town of Bethlehem is probably the most famous thing about our church. Most people don't know it was written here, but it was written by our second rector. So our second rector's name was Phillips Brooks. He was 2 years out of seminary. He was originally at the church in Kennett Square. That was his first church, and was brought over here, sort of recruited from that church to be the rector here, because at the time he was sort of a superstar in the Philadelphia, and actually in the whole world, in the whole United States, because that was when the preaching and speaking and orating was just the big thing. Everybody wrote speeches, and he was an amazing orator. He was a preacher, an orator. There's stories, legend says that 1,500 people came to see him every week at the church, to hear him preach, to hear him teach. And he would have about 1,000 people in one service, and then he'd have another service, and some of those people would come back, and new people would come. And so they estimated about 1,500 people listened to him preach every week. And so he was preaching and teaching right before the Civil War. He was an extremely outspoken person against slavery. He was very pro-Lincoln, and he really thought that Lincoln was going to be the great uniter for the United States after the Civil War. He had this hope, this excitement about who Lincoln was and Lincoln's dream for the church. And when Lincoln was killed, it was extremely devastating for him. Lincoln was killed on Good Friday, and which is a high holy day in the church. And he was so devastated that he had to take a leave of absence from the church. And so he asked for a year's absence from the church, and the board, what we call the vestry, gave it to him. And he decided he needed to sort of rekindle his faith. And so he traveled to the Holy Land and to Greece and Rome and other places that sort of were the heart of his faith. And he happened to be in on Christmas Eve. He was in the Holy Land, and he decided he would go to this traditional service they have at the site where Jesus was born in Bethlehem. And the tradition there is that they sing songs and carols throughout the night, and it was sort of an all-night service. And so he went to that service. He had sort of previously written carols and songs, and he was really interested in children's songs and carols. And so he had written a songbook before he took this time off. Some of his songs were sung in the church regularly, but that night he was really inspired by the sort of singing and being in the place where Jesus was born. And so from that, he went home and he wrote down the lyrics that we now know as A Little Town of Bethlehem. And he kind of put it away and didn't do anything with it, finished his tour, came back to church. And a couple years later, towards the end of the Civil War, he decided he would, or not towards the end of the Civil War because it was later, but a little bit later when he came back, he decided he wanted to give this song to the children as a gift to them for Christmas, because a lot of children had lost family members, parents during the war, and he wanted to give them some sort of hope and joy. But the interesting thing about the carol itself is that it is also a very authentic thing. So it doesn't just say like, Christmas is the happiest time of the year. it talks about, the line, our hopes and fears, of all the years are met in thee tonight, in Jesus. It talks about, Mary sort of covering and holding the children as they mourn the losses. And it really talks about the experience that the world was having at that time. That's pretty authentic and not covering up, but also the beauty that Jesus is not just a gift that sort of makes everyone happy, but a gift of like transforming our lives where we are. And so he really wanted to give it to the children as part of their pageant, as a gift. And he asked Lewis Redner, who is the composer for the music, to write it, and Lewis Redner did not want to write it, apparently. That's the story. He didn't have any interest in writing a silly children's song, and he was procrastinating, and the night before, and Phillips Brooks was like, we have to get this out, tomorrow is Christmas. And so the night before Christmas Eve pageant, so I guess the 23rd, he was frustrated, he didn't want to write it, he kind of fell asleep on the piano, and as he was nodding off, he describes it as the angels whispered the tune into his ears, and he sprang up and he wrote it down, and that became the inspiration for the tune that we call St. Louis. There's also an English tune that's different, but the one that we use is St. Louis, named after Lewis Redner, but spelled differently because he didn't want to be thought of as sort of haughty by calling himself a saint. So that's why he named it Louis, even though Lewis Redner is Lewis. So they presented it to the children, and I think they didn't think it would be anything. They didn't think it would really turn into anything, and then it has. It's stuck around. It became sung. He moved to Boston. He went to Trinity Copley Square in Boston shortly after that. And then he became the Bishop of Massachusetts. Phillips Brooks did. Excuse me. And so I think with his prominence and his moving and sort of redoing the hymn, it kind of got bigger in the world, and then it just sort of spread and spread. And so now everybody kind of knows it and has heard it. So that's the history of the hymn. I think how it influences our church is a couple things. First, it's obviously something that we've embraced as something that's ours, and we cherish it. And the back wall here, this mural was commissioned in the 1920s by a really famous woman muralist named Hildreth Meir, and she created this. It was commissioned specifically because a little town of Bethlehem was written in here. So what we have behind us is an absolute. It's a product of the fact that a little town of Bethlehem was here, written here. But I think also Phillips Brooks and Lewis Redner, their legacy in this church of sort of speaking out into the world about injustices, I think their interest in sort of creating some authenticity in how we pray and think about Jesus, I think their interest in sharing the gift that Jesus is, not just a happy birthday Jesus, but the sort of deep, deep gift that the incarnation of God into our world is. Those things have seeped into the sort of bones of this place, not just on our walls, but sort of in the heart of us. And I think we as a church have really sort of continued that striving for justice, continue to be an authentic space and a safe space for people who are in need of healing. I think they took Phillips Brooks' desire to sort of learn and heal when he went away as sort of their gift to people, and so we have a really strong healing ministry. People are really educated and like to learn more and more, and I think, like I said, we tend to be, we try to be as authentic as we can in the way we present our faith.
I
think you answered my third question.
What's the third one? Remind me what it is.
How does your church carry out the legacy of Philip Brooks and Lewis Redner and Carol? I think you just answered that.
Yeah, I think the other really interesting, there's a couple other interesting historical facts about our church. So there, in the 1950s, it was sort of the booming part of the world where the church was sort of just growing and growing and growing. And Floyd Tompkins was our rector at the time. He came from New York and he was here, and the church really grew under his leadership. Some people say there was 3,000 people that worshiped here over 3 services. There were children that were part of it. It was really booming. His influence, so it wasn't just that they were big. He also had a heart for, like Brooks, people who were oppressed. And this was during right before the Korean War. And so he helped establish the first Korean Congress 100 years ago, which was, I guess this is the 20s then, but he was here for 37 years. I think he was the longest serving rector. And he helped, so the first Korean Congress, independent Congress, was in Philadelphia, down the street. It was now the Players Theater, and he was the one who helped establish that and bring that together. And so he helped create a sort of independent Korea in some ways. And that was a big, we just had the 100th anniversary, I think in 2019, maybe 2018, 2019. And all of the sort of big parts of the Korean world were here celebrating that. We've also, just recently, our church has sort of moved into the realm of physically helping people who are in need. So my husband, John, he is, originally we were connected with another nonprofit, but last year, a little over a year ago, that nonprofit went on to another space, and so our church took over that ministry. And so we have been serving and feeding and clothing people in need almost every day, but serving meals twice a week, and participating in the needs of people in this local neighborhood. And I think that really is part of Brooks' legacy, was to really speak out for voices that aren't able to be spoken, and to share the good news with them and be of service to them without sort of making them be something back.
Very informative, very interesting.
Yeah.
I'd like to thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure.
Yeah, it's really nice. I'm so glad you could come. I love talking about this hymn. I think Redner and Brooks are really interesting people. And the hymn is, of course, the carol is, of course, a beloved treasure.
Thank you, Reverend.
Thank you.
Today we are at beautiful Woodlawn Cemetery in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And it is near Christmas time in Philadelphia. So we are here to pay our respects and visit the grave of Lewis Henry Redner. Lewis Henry Redner was born on December 15th, 1831 in Philadelphia, PA. He died on August 29th, 1908 at Hotel Marlborough in Atlantic City, New Jersey, age 76 and 6 months. He was an American musician, organist, and composer of a famous Christmas song. As the organist for 19 years at Church of the Holy Trinity in Rittenhouse Square. The pastor at the time, Philip Brooks, returned from a pilgrimage to Bethlehem, the birthplace of Christ. Brooks wrote a poem for the Sunday school students to sing. He asked Redner to compose a melody to go with the poem, to be played at the Christmas Mass of 1868. Redner completed the musical piece just hours before the service. The poem and accompanying music became the much beloved Christmas carol, O Little Town of Bethlehem. Of that Christmas carol, Redner said, in his own words, as Christmas of 1868 approached, Mr. Brooks told me that he had written a simple little carol for the Christmas Sunday school service and asked me to write the tune to it. The simple music was written in great haste and under great pressure. We were to practice it on the following Sunday. Mr. Brooks came to me on Friday and said, Redner, have you ground out that music yet to O Little Town of Bethlehem? I replied, no, but that he should have it by Sunday. On the Saturday night previous, my brain was all confused about the tune. I thought more about my Sunday school lesson than I did about the music. But I was roused from sleep late in the night, hearing an angel strain whispering in my ear, and seizing a piece of music paper, I jotted down the treble of the tune as we now have it. And on Sunday morning before going to church, I filled in the harmony. Neither Mr. Brooks nor I ever thought the carol or the music to it would live beyond that Christmas of 1868. That was a recount in Redner's own words. Redner also worked in the real estate business while playing organ for 4 different churches during his lifetime. He never married and died August 29th, 1908. And he is buried here in Section F of Woodlawn Cemetery. And on his grave it says, wrote the original music to the carol O Little Town of Bethlehem, Church of the Holy Trinity, Rittenhouse Square. And his name is on the family stone, not the Redner at the top, but the Lewis H Redner, which is the 4th one down. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell to be notified when I release a new video. Thank you, and have a very Merry Christmas.